And we should be live. Let me pull up the chat box as we wait for people to come on. Big news, Alexander, huh?
Absolutely, very big news. I mean, very dangerous news. The situation in the Gulf is getting more dangerous by the hour, and one has to wonder where it's all leading. And as we'll no doubt discuss in our video, the signals, the initial signals, are not good.
I think people are jumping on, but real quickly, where do you think it's leading? Let's just jump in and.
Well, this was an incident where the Iranians, in shooting down this drone, which is a high altitude, high speed, jet powered, big drone, not one of the sort of smaller, lighter drones that are the ones we usually see. It's an advanced global hawk drone. They both demonstrated their capability, but they also demonstrated their resolve. And their resolve, basically, to stand up to the United States, to show to the United States that they will defend themselves, and they have the capability to do so. The trouble is, there are some people in the United States who show every incentive to pick up that challenge and to double down and launching their own strikes on Iran. And the person who's holding this back, to a certain extent at the moment, but who it's clear his mind is not yet made up on this, is Donald Trump. He's uncertain what to do. That's how I read some of his messages. On the one hand, he's warning the Iranians. On the other hand, he's not yet, I think, fully decided to launch an attack on Iran. But his latest comments may indicate that that's the direction in which he's now going.
All right. If you guys can hear me okay in the chat, let me know. If you hear Alexander okay, let me know. I'm not sure what the stream quality is like, Alexander. Internet has been a little, choppy here in Athens the past couple of days. I don't know about what's going on in London, but hopefully the stream is good and the sound quality is good.
Yes.
And let's see where people are checking in from. We have from Sacramento, Jason, Simon from Cyprus, No Sense from the Netherlands. Okay, we just did a video on MH17, which will be going up soon. That'll be a good video. Big Boy from Turkey, from Pakistan, from Holland, North Virginia. All right, my old home. Iris from Jordan, or from Cheshire, England. Hello from England, Helen. All right. Where else are people joining us today? All good. S. Bennett says thank you, S. Bennett. Great. Big news. Very, very big news. Let's see. Where do we start it off from? Jonathan from Texas. Hello, Jonathan. Good to have you here. Andy from Slovakia. From Somalia. All right, guys. Make sure to smash that like button. Make sure if you're not subscribed to the channel to subscribe to the channel as well. And Hakan from Amsterdam. We have Canada. Cheryl from London. I'm hearing a lot of smashes of the like button, Alexander, which is good. Toronto, Switzerland, Cornwall, England, Manchester. A lot of people joining us from the UK. That is where the Oracle of London is right now. He was the Oracle of Athens a couple of days ago, but now he is back to being the Oracle of London. From Montpellier, from Brussels, from Arizona, AZ. All right. Alexander, let me read you the Trump tweet that shook the markets, shook the world. Donald Trump, and I quote, "Iran made a very big mistake!" Exclamation point. Alexander, take it away.
Yes,
what are your thoughts?
That is basically a warning to Iran. I mean, he's basically saying to the Iranians that you made a big mistake by shooting down our drone. The U.S. claims, of course, that it was shot down over international waters. The Iranians claim it was shot down over their airspace. I'm not going to try and arbitrate who's telling the truth on this story. All I will say is that drone was clearly carrying out surveillance on Iran. And that's why the Iranians shot it down. I mean, it wasn't there just to see the scenery of the Gulf, attractive though apparently it is. So Trump's warning to Iran, the danger with making warnings like that is that if you don't follow through with them, it can look like bluff. And I don't think Donald Trump will want to be shown up as making bluffs, even at the same time as I don't think he wants a war in the Middle East and with the Iranians and in the Gulf, interrupting the flow of oil. And I think if you had any doubt about the danger of that, the spike in the oil price, which has been happening over the course of today, directly following his tweet, will have warned him of the dangers of this. So I think he's got to balance his decisions very carefully. And now he's had this meeting with Justin Trudeau, in which he seems to be trying to give the Iranians an opportunity to back off by saying that it was probably a decision made by someone lower down in the hierarchy, not by the Iranian political leadership. I don't think anybody believes that, but that does look to me a little bit like Donald Trump trying to find a way of climbing down from this position that he's put himself into by offering the Iranians a way for them to step down also, by admitting that it was, somebody not at the top of the Iranian leadership who authorized this thing. I don't think the Iranians will do that, and I think that will leave Donald Trump in a difficult position where he will have to decide what to do. And he also said something else which fills me with concern when he was asked whether or not the United States would respond militarily. He used the words, "You will find out soon enough," which is, of course, exactly the same words he used in the run-up to the missile attack on Syria following the chemical incident at Khan Shaykhun, and it's very similar to what he said in the run-up to the missile attack on Syria after the events in Douma. So that suggests to me that his mind is considering at least the possibility of a military attack on Iran, and it looks to me as if some people in the United States are pushing for it. Well, I don't think anybody will be surprised about that.
Yeah, let me read you these two contradictory statements here. The one question, like you referred to, was, are you willing to go to war with Iran? Where Trump says, quote, "You'll find out." But as he was with Justin Trudeau in the Oval Office, there was this incident where it was shooting down the U.S. drone might have been a mistake by an Iranian general or someone else. That's what Trump said. And then he also said, I quote, "I find it hard to believe it was intentional." This is what he said when he was with Trudeau. Alexander, what do you make of those two statements? And what do you think Trudeau is saying about this? Do you think Trudeau is maybe advising him not to start a conflict with Iran? I mean, he's there in the Oval Office with Trudeau, so Trudeau obviously has his ear.
Yes, well, let's first of all begin with Trudeau. I mean, I think Trudeau has been a consistent hardliner on neocon-type policies. So I would not see him as a voice for moderation in this kind of conflict or a voice for realism. The only thing I would say about Trudeau is that a lot of people who are very hardline on all kinds of other matters nonetheless do balk at the prospect of a war, an outright war with Iran, because of what it might do to the oil price. And Trudeau, who also faces an election later this year, might not want a war with Iran for that sort of reason. And it may be that he is cancelling moderation for that reason, and that may be what has provoked these comments from Donald Trump. But having said that, I wouldn't count on Trudeau as being an important voice in this, and I don't think Donald Trump has much time for Trudeau anyway, and I don't think he's going to pay very much attention to what Trudeau tells him. I think Donald Trump will be concerned about three things. Firstly, the response of his electoral base especially if oil prices rise and the United States becomes involved in another war in the Middle East, when he won the election as president of the United States by promising to disengage the United States from wars. So I think that's the first concern he has. The second concern I'm sure has is I've no doubt that he's getting some advice from some people within the uniformed military who are telling him that a war with Iran, even a missile attack on Iran, is a very bad idea. However, the military are not in as strong a position to give him advice on these sort of questions as they were a year ago, because his former defense secretary, James Mattis, who was a Marine general, has gone, and his former national security advisor, General McMaster, who was also a general, has also gone, and General Kerry, who was his chief of staff, who was also a Marine general, they've all gone. So he no longer has that kind of advice from the uniformed military anymore. The two people who seem to be giving him the advice are John Bolton, who is apparently traveling to the Middle East as we are speaking, and of course Mike Pompeo. And they are not moderates in this matter.
Not good news.
Not good news. Bolton, who is the national security advisor, who has apparently succeeded in blocking off critical voices from reaching Trump. I mean, he's a very skilled bureaucrat. Apparently, he has been pushing for a military strike on Iran for decades. So the fact that he's in the driving seat is a very ominous sign. But as I said, I'm not saying that there aren't countervailing forces. It's just they're not very strong. And it really comes down to Donald Trump and the decision that Donald Trump is going to make.
All right, we'll get to some questions in the chat and the super chat in a minute. But Alexander, I want to ask you a very simple question, which you mentioned Syria and the missile strikes on Syria during the chemical attacks, which many people think were just, kind of decoys to get the neocons off Trump's back because the collateral damage was minimal, especially when you consider all the voices that were trying to goad Trump into an all-out attack on Syria. What is the difference between a Syria missile attack of that sort, just for, I'll say for show, so to speak, and doing the same thing in Iran? What would be the difference there? Can Trump use the same tactic if it was a tactic? I'm not saying it was, but if it was a tactic, an off-ramp for Trump.
Yes. Well, I think
Why is it different between Syria? Yeah. What's the difference between Syria and Iran?
I mean, they are completely different. Firstly, I mean, Syria is a far less powerful country than Iran. It is not in a position itself to hit back. It didn't have the systems to strike at American warships launching these missile attacks from the Eastern Mediterranean. And to the extent that there was a powerful military in Syria which was capable of hitting back at those warships, that was the Russian military, which is a highly disciplined and sophisticated military with which the United States is in continuous contact and with which it could broker agreements to de-escalate a situation like this. None of that applies to Iran. Iran is a much more powerful country than Syria. Its military may not be remotely up to the level of sophistication of the United States military, but it is by Middle East standards a powerful military with long-range missiles. It's just demonstrated the capability of shooting down an advanced US drone. And of course, unlike the Russians, the Iranians are not in direct contact with the United States. They are not in a position to broker agreements to de-escalate tensions with the United States. And if there is a missile strike on them, even a limited one, they may very well feel that this is an attack on Iran, on themselves, by a government, the United States, which has shown every intention of wanting to overthrow their own. And in that kind of situation, there is no obvious reason why Iran should not escalate correspondingly. And it's very easy to see, given that kind of logic, how this could easily become a major shooting war.
All right, Margaret, you read my mind, Margaret, in the chat. She says a drone is nothing to wage war about, and that's my question, Alexander. This was a big drone. This wasn't a small, piece of machinery. So this was a really major deal. This drone, as far as the type of machine that it was and the type of of drone that it was. The wingspan, I think, was that of a Boeing. I mean, it's just a huge wingspan. This is a big thing. But saying that, this isn't something to go over, to have a war over, is it? I mean, a drone, unmanned drone is okay.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, so is Margaret, if I may say so. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a drone. No one was killed. And as I said, it's not as if the Iranians deliberately shot down a manned US aircraft. A drone is absolutely not something to go to war over. And I would add, by the way, that during the Cold War, both the Russians and the Americans, as is now known, did shoot down their respective sides' aircraft when they were encroaching on their airspace, and they did that without having an all-out war. So certainly we should not have a war over an incident like this.
Yeah, I mean, U-2, like the U-2 spy planes were shot down very often, during the Cold War. Yeah.
Exactly. And those are manned, of course.
Yeah.
So we should certainly not be going to war over an incident of this kind. But that, relies on rational decisions being made by rational people. On Iran, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo don't come across as very rational to me. I hope that there are enough rational people around to, point out to Donald Trump, who will have to make the final decision, how irrational going to war with Iran over an incident like this would be. By the way, I've heard that one person that he sought advice from, I've heard it today from a radio interview. I don't know whether it's true, but one person apparently is Tucker.
Carlson,
exactly. You've heard the same thing. Now, I hope this is true, because frankly, he's talking an awful lot more sense at the moment than anybody in the National Security Council. But we'll see.
God, I hope he's listening to Tucker Carlson. Yeah. Oh my God. Alexander, let's get to some super chats. We have a lot in the queue, so let's get right to it. From Penguins fan, what are China, Russia doing behind closed doors about the Iran shooting down a U.S. drone? So do you think, you mentioned that in Syria, Russia was able to liaise with the United States before the missile strike in Syria. Do you think that Russia and or China is playing a similar role here with Trump and the U.S.?
Yes. I think they will try to. But if I may say so, there was a very, very interesting comment out of Russia today by Vladimir Putin. Now, Vladimir Putin did one of his extraordinary 4-hour TV marathons, but he answered a question about Syria, in which they were talking about brokering peace agreements in Syria, and he said very clearly Russia does not sell out its allies, its friends and allies. Now, I think that obviously that was partly about Syria, but in a situation like the one we have now, I think it was also in part intended as a warning to the United States about Iran, that Russia will not sell out Iran. It may have its own differences with the Iranian leadership. It absolutely does not want war in the Gulf. If the United States attacks Iran, and if that is, the Russians will do what they can to contain it. But if that escalates into all-out war in Iran, against Iran, with an attempt to overthrow the government of Iran, Russia will oppose it. And it will oppose it with whatever resources it can. And Russia has a lot of resources to oppose it. And I have no doubt that the Russians and the Chinese are talking together all the time about this issue. I have no doubt that the Chinese are on the same wavelength with the Russians on this one. And I've seen reports that Xi Jinping, China's leader, has made it very clear also that China will strive, despite the sanctions, to maintain commercial links with Iran, which at a time like this is also a signal of support for Iran.
All right, from Sparky, the Americans allowed the drone to be shot down for an added excuse to go to war for the benefit of the military-industrial complex. What do you make of that?
It's possible. I mean, things like that have happened before. I don't know that for a fact. And if I have to be honest, I think it's unlikely. I think that it's unlikely they would use such an expensive piece of kit to stage an incident, a Gulf of Tonkin incident of this sort. But, you know, some things like this have happened before. I mean, I just mentioned the Gulf of Tonkin. And when you're talking about people like Bolton, you can't discount those sort of possibilities.
Yeah, and another super chat from Sparky. Drone was likely near the end of its useful life, like the 59 cruise missiles, which were fired on the same point in Syria. It helped the military.
Well, I've heard lots of stories about the Global Hawk, which is that this is the kind of drone that we're talking about, that it's actually not a particularly effective surveillance system anymore, that it's certainly not up to operating in the kind of airspace which is defended by advanced surface-to-air missiles like the S-300 and the S-400, which the Russians make, and of course which the Iranians, in terms of the S-300, also have. So maybe it was close to the end of its useful life, like the missiles that the United States launched against Syria. But nonetheless, that doesn't take away from the dangerous nature of this situation.
All right. From Retro Pirate Truth Seeker, people, in all caps, people who cannot afford a super chat should still be heard. Don't you agree? Cost me £5. Thank you for that super chat. Yes, we do agree, and we try to absolutely we try to answer as many questions from the chat as we can. But it is a fast-moving chat, and
yes.
we don't have a team of moderators here. So while we appreciate your super chat, Retro Pirate, we are doing our best to answer as many questions as we can. From Katie Miggs, do you think that it is likely that Iran would attack Saudi Arabia if the U.S. bombs it? Iranians have made that threat.
Yes, I think if this thing escalates, if we see anything that remotely resembles an all-out war, with the Iranians undoubtedly, in military terms, the weaker party, but also the party that is coming under attack, then I expect the Iranians to respond with all the means at their disposal. So they will try to blockade the Straits of Hormuz, and it's entirely possible that they could launch missile strikes on Saudi Arabian and United Arab Emirates oil installations. If they succeed in those sort of strikes, you will see the price of oil zoom to stratospheric levels. I mean, I've heard of $250 a barrel was one figure that I saw somebody mention. So, you know, I think that is the kind of stakes that we are playing with, over above the cost in human lives, which will be very high.
All right. From Retro Pirate Truth Seeker, it's an Iranian trap. They might prefer war. I've heard this theory actually thrown out there, that this is actually what the Iranians want. Do you buy into this theory?
No, I don't actually. I mean, I do understand why some people say that, and you know, you can game plan it in a way, but I think it's most unlikely that a country like Iran, which has major economic problems, and a military which, you know, by Middle East standards, it may be pretty tough, but it's not remotely up to the level of the United States, would actually solicit a war with the United States, whose military is immeasurably more powerful than its own. I think that a Iranian leadership that thought in those terms would be beyond reckless. I mean, almost insanely reckless. And whatever you may think of people like Khamenei, who's Iran's supreme leader, and Rouhani, who is its president, they don't come across to me as reckless in that way.
Okay, from Stu281, hi from Lincolnshire, UK. Thank you for that super chat, Stu. And from Retro Pirate, Iran supported by Russia, China, Pakistan, danger, World War III. And I'm looking in the chat right now, and Eleni also says that she's making the case that it could also spiral. You could have Greece against Turkey, for example. I mean, this thing could obviously, ripple out of control. I mean, if, and God help us, we don't get there, if a conflict does happen between the United States and Iran.
Well, I think it can. I mean, I think that there is a huge danger that it could. I mean, let's take our minds back to 2003 when the United States invaded Iraq, a far less powerful country than Iran, with a far weaker military in 2003 than the Iranian military is now. I mean, the Iranian military is much stronger now, by the way, than it was in 2003 or than it was at the time of the Iran-Iraq war. But that war, that invasion of Iraq, led to all sorts of consequences. It destabilized the Middle East. So we saw wars not just in Iraq, we saw a conflict in Syria, which is an outgrowth of that war. We saw the rise of ISIS. We've seen tensions all across the Middle East. Now, Iran, a much more powerful and bigger country, very, very strongly connected through diplomatic connections to countries like Pakistan, to countries like Turkey, to many of the Central Asian states, and of course, ultimately to the Chinese and the Russians. I mean, a war involving a country like that has completely unpredictable consequences and potentially very dangerous ones.
Okay, Alexander, let's see, from Caroline, a $20 super chat. Thank you very much, Caroline, for that super chat. Alexander, 2 questions from the chat from It's a Drone. What will the EU do? What will the European Union do? And the second question is from Wild Goose 59. This is a good question. Do you think Trump has the nuance to realize how serious this is?
Yes, right. Let's deal with the Europeans because, I mean, they are the major disappointment, if you like, in this affair. I mean, disappointment to many people, not to me, by the way. I wrote an article which you can find on the Duran way back when the US pulled out of the JCPOA, that the Iranians, if they were expecting the Europeans to stand up for them, were going to be bitterly disappointed, and that the Europeans would do nothing. The Europeans are doing nothing. The German foreign minister, Mr. Maas, has made some critical comments at the time of the tanker incident. He said that the Americans had failed to prove their case, that it was the Iranians who were behind that incident. And that's basically all he said. Mogherini, who is the European Foreign Affairs Commissioner, has said that she hopes that Donald Trump will, well, she hasn't said it, one of her aides has said it, in fact, that they hope that Donald Trump will sack John Bolton. Well, maybe he will, maybe he won't. But I mean,
please sack John Bolton, please.
But I know. But I mean, what this situation calls for is for the European Council to meet urgently and to make a decisive statement saying that a war against Iran at this time is completely inadvisable and that the European Union will oppose it. But they've not done that. They're saying nothing. And in fact, the United Kingdom government, which, let's remember, is still a member of the European Union, they're saying nothing at all, except that Jeremy Hunt, our foreign minister, says that he will support the United States because they are our ally. So, the Europeans have achieved nothing. They are doing nothing. They are letting this catastrophe unravel in relation to a country that is, only about 3 hours flight from parts of Europe. I mean, Iran is not that far away. I mean, it may feel far away in the United States. It may feel far away in Britain. But, if you live in a place like Greece or Cyprus, Iran isn't so far away, actually. And yet they're doing nothing about it at all. I think it's a terrible situation. Can you remind me of the other question, Alex?
Do you think that Trump realizes the nuance of what's going on?
I don't know. I mean, he's not a very experienced in foreign policy, that he's obviously become a lot more experienced in the 2 years that he's been president. I think Donald Trump does understand the oil price and the dangers to the oil price. Where he may be miscalculating is, I think he may not fully understand that Iran is not some, little third world country that the United States can knock about. It's not Syria, it's not Iran, Iraq. It's a kind of country that might be able to hit back. And maybe he doesn't understand that fully. And of course, if the reports that John Bolton has managed to prevent doubting voices from the Pentagon speak to Trump, it may be that he's not getting that advice.
All right, let's go back to some super chats. Alexander Jan gave us a 20 Canadian dollar super chat. Thank you, Jan, for that super chat. And from Jonathan Alexander, a super chat. Trump's language in the press conference seemed to say he's disinclined to strike back and suggests that Tucker Carlson has his ear behind the scenes. As we said, let's hope so, because Tucker has been perhaps the only mainstream media voice that has been vocal against a conflict with Iran. What do you make of that comment by Jonathan?
Well, to a certain extent, I agree. I mean, these comments, whatever they show, the one thing they do show is that Donald Trump is not enthusiastic about the prospect of a war against Iran. He obviously doesn't want a military strike against Iran. He may feel that he has no option but to strike Iran, because otherwise his bluff may be called and the bluff of the US may be called. But it's not something he wants to do. If Tucker Carlson really is advising him, and if he is following or listening to Tucker Carlson's advice, and that is having an effect on him, then all I can say is that Tucker Carlson is a hero and someone to whom not just the people of Iran, but the people of the United States and of the West owe a huge debt of gratitude.
Yeah. Retro Pirate Truth Seeker has a super chat for us, but he also says in the chat, 400 likes, 2,200 people watching at the moment. That is great news. Unfortunately, the topic is not great news. But let's go to Retro Pirate super chat. Alexander, do you think this is all about the petrodollar? You mentioned 250. I mean, that just sounds impossible to believe.
Well, it would be. Of course, I should say, a lot would depend if the Straits of Hormuz are blockaded, and the Iranians haven't yet demonstrated that capability, but they claim they have it, and how long it is blockaded. If it's only blockaded for a few hours, then, the oil price will spike, and then it would come down again. The Iranians not only have to be able to impose a blockade, they need to be able to sustain it. And that may not be so straightforward. But if you have done any work with the world shipping industry, which I have, by the way, I know a bit about shipping, you know that it revolves around insurance. And insurance companies may not be willing to allow oil tankers to go through war zones. Now, there may be ways of getting around that. There may be ways, essentially, of pressuring oil tankers and of the US government taking control over them. Or it may be, as to some extent happened during the Iran-Iraq war, that the United States would escort it through its fleet navy oil tankers, but that would also be expensive. And if there is an all-out war, and if the Straits of Hormuz are blockaded, then you could very well see, I think, if that blockade is sustained, a very, very high oil price indeed. Now, is this all about protecting the petrodollar? I think with John Bolton, he does think in those terms, but I think with him, it's a visceral thing. I think he's been itching to avenge himself on Iran because of of the humiliations he thinks the US has suffered at Iran's hands, all the way back to the Iran hostage drama of 1979, but also he sees the growth of Iranian power in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon. And I think he wants to reverse this because he sees Iran as the enemy of the United States. And of course, there's the overarching question of Israel, which for someone like Bolton and the other neocons, the security of Israel is always a paramount concern. So I think there are many factors. The petrodollar may be one of them.
And that's a great segue into our next super chat, Alexander. Israel did have huge military training events, I believe yesterday or today, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They had huge exercises, military exercises. I think some of the biggest they've had in years. So this is very worrisome. From FSX Gnome, what's your view on Zionism?
What is my view on Zionism? Well, that
you mentioned neocons. You mentioned Israel.
Yeah. I mean, if I may say so, Zionism can be used by the expression Zionism can be used by various people as a code word for hostility to Jews generally. That is absolutely not the way I see Zionism. I see Zionism as the ideology which led to the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, something which I think was done in an extremely unfortunate and terrible way, leading to the mass migration and expulsion of hundreds of thousands of people. And I think that to the extent that Zionism today is the ideology of the Israeli state's expansion and of its construction as an exclusivist Jewish state in the Middle East, I think it's a very unfortunate and very bad thing indeed. But if I can come back to this particular crisis, at the moment, I think that what is causing the conflict between Iran and Israel is not any Iranian plan to wipe out Israel. It is that there are forces within Israel that see in Iran the country that is withstanding this expansionist, maximalist policy that Israel has been following in the Middle East with the extension of Jewish settlements into the Palestinian territories, and with Israel seeking to weaken what it calls the axis of resistance, the various bloc of Arab countries that are resisting it, like Syria, like Iraq, like Lebanon, at the back of which Israel perceives Iran.
Okay, really good answer, Alexander. From Jim Raines, thanks guys, I've been watching your videos. Thank you for that super chat, Jim Raines. From Penguins fan, will Iran at least get S-300 for defense?
Well, Iran already has S-300s. I mean, the Russians supplied them. I mean, there was a very controversial decision by Russia, by President Medvedev of Russia, as he then was. He was the president of the country. He's the prime minister now. Back in 2009, at the height of Obama's reset with the Russians, Medvedev agreed that the Russians would not supply S-300 missiles to Iran. But this is very controversial in Russia. A lot of Russians said this was a mistake, and a lot of Russians also pointed out correctly that supplying those S-300 missiles did not actually go against the UN sanctions on Iran at that time, because these are defensive weapons. Anyway, Vladimir Putin reversed that decision in 2015, and the S-300s have now in fact been supplied to Iran, and they are now part of the Iranian anti-aircraft missile arsenal.
All right, another super chat from Penguins fan. Adam Schiff is supporting Trump on Iran. Can you believe this?
Yes, I can. I'm sorry to say
Quite incredible.
I'm sorry to say I can believe it. And in fact, it's one of the most terrible things that we see, this terrible partisan war in the United States with people like Adam Schiff, attempting to delegitimize Donald Trump in every way they can, floating these absurd, insane conspiracy theories about the Russians having maneuvered Donald Trump into the presidency. And yet when the issue of Iran comes up, or indeed when the issue of war comes up, when Donald Trump does something violent and aggressive, when he backs regime change in Venezuela, when he launches missiles against Syria, when he threatens Iran, you see that Democrats like Adam Schiff, who oppose him on all other things, enter into a competition with Donald Trump to out-hawk him. And that is a terrible thing, because it removes every barrier for restraint in the United States, with the Republicans and the Democrats in competition for who will be the more extreme war party.
All right. Super chat from Retro Pirate. Iran wants to use the petro-euro, and why war is due. Is that true? Do they want to use the petro? Do they want to create a petro-euro?
They've talked about it. In fact, there's no question about this. I mean, they would like to move away from the dollar and to start trading in oil in other currencies. I mean, the Iranians, when they signed up to the JCPOA, that's the Iran nuclear deal, they were expecting that restrictions on their oil exports would be lifted, and they'd be able to trade with various countries, with India, with China, and of course, first and foremost, with the European Union, which was previously one of the major buyers of Iranian oil, and, by the way, potentially of Iranian gas. And the Iranians, who want to continue to develop that commercial relationship with the Europeans, they say to the Europeans, since the dollar, the US dollar, restricts you in whom you can trade with, because the US uses the dollar, its control of the dollar, to try to enforce the sanctions it has on various countries, including its own European allies. The Iranians say to them, well, why in that case use the dollar at all? Why not use the euro? But the Europeans at the moment are showing no interest in doing it.
All right. From XXR on XX, a super chat. Will Russia support Iran if a war breaks out?
Yes, I think we've discussed this. I think the first thing, first of all, we should be very clear about this. The Russians will oppose such a war. I mean, they made that absolutely.
What does that mean, though? Oppose such a war?
Yeah, I mean, they've said very clearly that they would totally condemn a U.S. military attack on Iran, and the Russians have cast cold water on the tanker allegations, the allegation that the Iranians launched the attack on the tankers, and they said very clearly that they think a attack on Iran would be a huge mistake. I think the Russians will do two things. Firstly, if there is an attack on Iran, they will do what they can to sustain the Iranian economy to the extent that they can. They will provide Iranians with fuel and raw materials and technology and machinery and all the things that they can to keep the Iranian economy alive. They will also undertake diplomatic pressure on the Saudis, on the Israelis, and on the United States to try to get them to stop this war as soon as possible. And they will recruit all the allies that they can find to get their support with this. So they will speak to countries like China, they will speak to countries like India, they will speak to countries like Turkey. But if the war escalates, I predict that the Russians will do everything that they can to prevent what for them would be the great nightmare, which is regime change in Iran, forced regime change in Iran. And I expect that would involve the flow of military materials and possibly even advice to Iran. I think this would be, for the Russians, a major red line.
Okay, a super chat from Retro Pirate Truth Seeker. Thank you for that super chat. What do your partners think about your work? Imagine partners. I imagine your wife. I imagine Alexander.
Well, my wife wholeheartedly supports me in that work. In fact, Catherine doesn't just wholeheartedly support me, but she makes it possible in all kinds of ways. And if you're talking about my friends and colleagues, well, most of them also support me too. Lots of people think in Britain as the way I do. And I'm not going to name this person, but on Friday I will be hosting a very, very well-known journalist in Britain who is written for mainstream media, and who I know also shares the same sort of views I have.
All right. Interesting question. I'm not married, so I don't really have to answer that question. Let's see. Penguins fan. What will Erdogan in Turkey be doing right now on an Iran incident?
Well, he will oppose it also. He will be like the Russians. And of course, he is also, by the way, made very, very clear to the US that he will not back down on the S-400 purchase from Russia, despite the threats from the United States that if he goes ahead with that purchase, if he does buy these missiles from Russia, he will be faced with US sanctions intended to cripple the Turkish economy. Turkey has very close relations with Iran. It buys oil from Iran. I think that if the United States goes to war with Iran, it will face intense opposition from Turkey, and not, by the way, just from Erdogan, but from the Turkish people also.
Okay, super chat from Robert Carr. Bitcoin for the world, crypto for the world, making people independent from fiat currency. Well, oil price, if there's a conflict, the oil price will soar. I mean, to the benefit of Saudi Arabia and to Russia, I mean, for that matter. But is crypto...
Well, the Saudis will benefit to some extent, but of course, if the Straits of Hormuz are blockaded, then they won't be able to sell their oil. So, I mean, I don't really see that they would gain so much. The Russians, in financial terms, would gain hugely. I mean, they're running at the moment very, very big budget, trade and balance of payments surpluses on the higher oil price. And of course, if the oil price goes up even further, they will run those surpluses will grow even more. But I come back to what I've said on previous programs. The Russians will trade all of that gladly for peace in the Middle East and on their southern borders. They will not want a war, even if in the short term they materially benefit from it, because they would regard a war and a possible crisis in Iran, possibly extending to their own Central Asian backyard, as far too great a danger for Russia to contemplate, even if the advantage comes in the form of a higher oil price.
Okay, a super chat from Retro Pirates. What do you do for your mental health and well-being? I guess in reference to all the bad news that we read just about every day, Alexander, what do you do to keep sane in news cycles like this one? Especially when you have news cycles like what's going on now.
Right, well, there's two things. Firstly, I drink from mugs like this, which we've talked about many times on our programs. I drink tea, but the other thing I do is I talk to Alex. I go on the Duran. I express my thoughts and opinions. That is the best way, because, of course, if you try and bottle this all up to yourself, that's how you get really depressed. Because if you come onto these sort of programs and you speak, what you find is that there are hundreds, millions of people who think the way you do, and you're not alone in thinking like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think the community that participates in our chats, in our live streams, the community that watches our videos, Alexander, I think that is therapy, in that you read the comments and you see what people are saying and you understand that you're definitely not alone in your worldview.
If I can just say something very quickly, that's why I started doing all of this. I mean, it started with a blog because I felt so upset and angry at some of the things that I was reading, and I felt that I had to express them and to set them out. And then that evolved into this much more positive and constructive work that Alex and I and Peter and the others on the Duran are doing now, which is explaining to the world what is happening.
All right. Great super chat there, Retro Pirate. Super chat from Penguins fan. You think MBS has a hand in this Iran incident?
Oh, absolutely. Of course he does. I mean, he's there. He and his friend, the Crown Prince of of Abu Dhabi, are heavily involved in all sorts of things. And I'm sure, I don't know about the actual global hawk, whether they played any role in that, but I am sure that they're, as of this moment, phoning up Washington and speaking to their friends in Washington and in Israel. And they're saying, the United States can't just stand by and let these Iranians do these things. We need to teach the Iranians a lesson by hitting at Iran. I mean, MBS has made it very clear many times what he wants. And I'm afraid what he wants is war with Iran.
There was, I think the UN came out with a report on the Khashoggi thing with MBS that directly implicates MBS. Is that correct, Alexander?
Absolutely, it did. It absolutely did. They said that it was a pre-planned murder, and that he points all the way up. And I don't think they actually named MBS, but I don't think there's any doubt that they think he was involved. I don't think anybody has any doubts about that.
At this point, yeah, I think it would be shocked if he wasn't involved.
Indeed.
All right, a super chat from Retro Pirate. Never miss a show. And who do you watch? Thanks. Who do you watch, Alexander, for your news?
Well, I tend to.
Who do you read?
Well, I read lots of people. I mean, I read places like the Strategic Culture Foundation. I read all the mainstream media because I have to. I don't always agree with them. I read Russian media. Not just RT, by the way, but also Interfax and Sputnik and Itar TASS. TASS is a very important news place because that's where you get the official views of the Russians. I read all the big news agencies, Reuters.
Did we lose you, Alexander? We lost you
Hello?
for a little bit.
We
said Reuters.
You
said Reuters, yeah.
I said Reuters. I mean, I read Reuters, AP, all these places. I also read, lots of the U.S. press, Foreign Affairs, National Review, the American Conservative,
John Solomon, Andrew McCarthy, Sarah Carter.
Sarah Carter, The Nation. I mean, I'm usually reading long into the night. I'm usually still reading at 4 o'clock in the morning, and well, that's how. And of course, also Middle East places, Al Masdar, Al Monitor, the Iranian news agencies, Fars. So all of these places.
All right. Retro Pirate Truth Seeker Super Chat. Patriotism is rife in the U.S., hence support for wars. Yes. I would say it's split, Alexander. I mean, I think there is definitely, half of the country which may be gearing up for war. I think there's the other half, which oddly enough probably consists of Trump supporters along with progressives, real progressives, not like fake Young Turks progressives, real progressives who don't want war, and libertarians who don't want war.
Exactly. I think it's very important to stress that being a patriot doesn't mean supporting wars like these on Iran or whatever. Some of the most patriotic people I know in the United States, and we mentioned Tucker Carlson just recently, are totally opposed to these sort of wars, and that for me is true patriotism. What I think our viewer was referring to is that there is an awful lot of people who tend to take the attitude, my country right or wrong. If the United States finds itself in a conflict, I will automatically assume that it is the United States which is in the right, and I will not consider anything that argues the opposite. I'm afraid there is far too much of that kind of thinking around, and to my mind, that isn't true patriotism at all.
Okay, super chat from Dan. UK without a PM, no need for British allied support. How is the UK going to navigate this without a prime minister if conflict does erupt?
Very good question. Very, very good question. I mean, I should say that there will be a lot of opposition in Britain to a war against Iran. I mean, a lot of people will, I think, come out and oppose it, more than have done with Venezuela, more than have done with Libya. because this is such a big issue. And I think you will see a rally in support, big rallies in support of Iran. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of the opposition Labour Party, will undoubtedly oppose a war on Iran. The Conservative government is in great disarray at the moment. And though they will, I think, verbally support a US attack on Iran, I think that deep down, many of them will be very unhappy and concerned about it.
Okay. A super chat from Red Pirate Truth Seeker. Who's Alexander's friend that he's meeting? Is it George Galloway?
No, I'm not going to say.
George Galloway.
I'm not going to say. I mean, George Galloway and I do know each other, by the way. I mean, we've met.
I'll take a guess. I don't know who it is, but I'll take a guess that it's not George Galloway.
It is not George Galloway.
Okay.
I said someone who writes on mainstream media.
Okay. It's not Tucker Carlson, even though that would be interesting if it was.
And it's not Tucker Carlson either.
Okay. From Retro Pirate Truth Seeker. Turkey buying Russian defense system, but U.S. bases. Interesting comment there. That is true.
Yeah, very, very, very astute comment. And one wonders for how long this high wire act can go on for. Though, by the way, turning this thing back closer to home, I noticed that Jeffrey Pyatt, who is the U.S. ambassador to Greece, a man with a notorious reputation, he was previously, during the Maidan events, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, has now made a speech to the Greek military, which many people in Greece are interpreting as a call to Greece and Cyprus to give away, to make concessions to Turkey over Turkey's drilling for oil in Cypriot waters. So, it's a complicated game. Turkey clearly still has some allies within the US, and Turkey still is hedging its bets to some extent with the US. And Erdogan himself has recently said that he has a sound relationship with Donald Trump. But, I wonder for how long this can go on for. Sooner or later, I think, Turkey will have to make a choice. And we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, I've always said it to watch out for Pyatt. I've been saying it for a while now. The Greeks really need to watch out for Pyatt. He is about as sinister as it gets.
Absolutely.
Watch out for that guy.
Absolutely.
And my comment on the Turkey thing, Alexander, I think Turkey will always side with the U.S. I think the U.S. will always side with Turkey. That's just my own belief. I think when push comes to shove, when rubber meets the road, Turkey will ditch Russia, it will ditch China, it will side with the U.S., and the U.S. likewise will ditch whatever cooperation it has with Greece or Cyprus or anybody else, and will side with Turkey. That's just my opinion on it.
That has been the consistent history, and I will remind people that, of course, there was a period when Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, was leading Turkey, when Turkey also seemed to be very close to Russia, and of course that all dissolved away, and Turkey instead, during the Cold War, and even to some extent during the Second World War, seemed to be taking a rather strong anti-Russian position. So it could very well be that Turkey will change again and will revert to its traditional anti-Russian political orientation.
Yeah. From Legion Trooper Super Chat, does war help Trump's election chances? Not with me.
No, I don't think so. I think, on the contrary, a prolonged war would be a disaster for Donald Trump's electoral chances. And I think he does understand that, by the way. The question is, how does he get out of it, given the kind of people he surrounded himself with?
He hired them. He hired them.
Exactly. I don't think, there's been rumblings that he's not very happy with Bolton. But, he's got to be, if that is true, he's got to act on that and ditch him, because, Bolton is a real danger. And I don't think Bolton cares very much about Donald Trump's re-election. I think if Trump loses the election, Bolton gets his war with Iran, he will consider that a good trade.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. From Darren, a super chat, any opinion on Mohamed Morsi death? Good question.
Well, I should say I think Morsi was a disastrous president, but he was also a democratically elected president. And I am someone who opposes coups, having lived through one, by the way, in Greece when I was a child and seen what a coup can do to a country. And I think that the coup in Egypt was a bad thing. I think Morsi would have failed by himself. And I think that overthrowing him in the way that was done, and in the very savage and murderous way that was done, is going to store up many problems for Turkey in the future. I know a lot of people don't agree with that view. One of those people who doesn't agree with me on that, by the way, is Vladimir Putin, who has supported General Sisi, who is the president of Egypt, and who has made it very clear that he was very pleased to see the back of Morsi.
All right. A super chat from Retro Pirate Truth Seeker. You're my therapy. It's hard these days. Thank you for that super chat. It is. The news cycle is tough. No doubt about it.
Absolutely.
From Harry C. Smith. This is a good super chat. Have you guys seen the RT footage of Merkel violently shaking, standing right next to Zelensky?
Yes.
As the German anthem played in his official visit to Germany. Crazy. That was bizarre. It's not the first time she's shaken like that either.
No, it's not. It was very bizarre. I mean, she looked to me exhausted. Now she claimed that she was, very, dehydrated. I find that very odd, actually. I find that very unlikely. I mean, I'd have thought that before meeting the Ukrainian president in that way, she'd have made, or her aides would have taken precautions to make sure that she was properly hydrated. I mean, Zelensky is not an unimportant person for Merkel to meet. I think she's exhausted, and I think she also feels under extreme pressure and has been doing so for some time now. I mean, she's no longer the unchallenged and undisputed Queen of Europe that she used to be. And clearly the stress is starting to, take a physical toll. And I think that was what we saw.
Yeah, her Europe is falling apart because of the decisions that she made.
Well,
That's
indeed.
For sure.
Indeed.
Thank you for that super chat, Harry. Another super chat from Retro Pirate. When do you get time for work with all that reading, Alexander?
Well, when do I get time for work? My work.
Not enough hours in the day.
My reading nowadays is my work.
All right.
And I'll tell you something. I mean, I get a lot of satisfaction in the end from my work, as we've seen, coming onto this program, in talking, getting your questions. I mean, that makes my day. That makes it easier to contemplate facing these things, because I also learn a lot from the questions.
All right. From Retro Pirate Truth Seeker, I notice Alexander answers all the questions. Why?
Well, I mean, because
he's the oracle.
Because indeed, they're good questions. I mean, it's nice to be asked these questions, and why not?
Okay, from Petroleum Coal, is invading Iran feasible? Takes 500,000 plus U.S. troops. Is it feasible to invade Iran? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so, and I don't think that's the objective. I mean, it's not just a very big country, but it's also, as I said, got by Middle East standards, a disciplined army, and it's very, very mountainous.
It's a tough terrain.
It's a tough terrain. I mean, it's not like Iraq, where you could just roll your tanks through. I mean, I think it's basically impossible to invade, and certainly impossible to occupy with the kind of military resources the US has. And I think if the US tried to do it, I mean, it would be facing a disastrous outcome. But what I think is possible, and I think what we would be looking at, is a sustained bombing campaign. I think that is what the United States would try to do. So we'd have missile strikes on Iranian installations, we'd have bombing attacks on Iranian airfields, on industrial facilities, on communications.
Something along the lines of what NATO did to Serbia, you mean? Like a prolonged, extended bombing campaign?
A prolonged, extended bombing campaign. But it would have to be on an immeasurably bigger scale than we saw with Serbia, because Iran is a much bigger country, much more powerful country, and it has far more sophisticated air defenses.
Okay, from Retro Pirate, a super chat. Tories dying a slow death? We did a video on this actually today, so yeah.
Possibly. I mean, certainly they're living very dangerously. And I have to say, it still amazes me, despite all that's happening, that there continue to be quite obviously anti-Brexit people within the Conservative Party who are prepared to risk the future existence of the Conservative Party in order to keep Britain in the European Union. Is the European Union and keeping Britain inside it so worth so much? Is it worth fighting for and risking the existence of your own party and the political stability of your own country to achieve that? I would have thought not. But, some people, people like Dominic Geeve clearly think otherwise. So, yes, quite possibly we are looking at not the slow death of the Conservative Party, by the way, the very fast death of the Conservative Party.
Yeah. Super chat from Robert Carr. We oppose the war in Iraq to no avail. This is true. Well, just because the public speaks out, even a majority, doesn't mean there won't be a war. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right. But nonetheless, we must speak out.
Exactly.
Because, if we don't speak out, then, of course, it will happen. Absolutely. I mean, it's by speaking out that we use what influence we have.
They did prevent, a war was prevented in Syria under Obama because people did speak out. So
correct.
You have the flip side to it.
Exactly.
All right. Exactly. From Emmanuel, a super chat. You guys are the best. Thank you for that super chat, Emmanuel. From Stephen Garode, super chat. Iran is like Afghanistan in terrain and 3 times the size of Iraq. Would this be an occupation too far?
Yes, I think it would. I mean, I think if they tried to occupy Iran, it would definitely be a disaster. I don't think they could do it. I think the Iranian people would resist. And as I said, it's a very sophisticated society. It's fully capable of withstanding an invasion like that. I don't think anybody in Washington is crazy enough to try it.
All right, from Red Truth Pirate Super Chat. Any thoughts on Egypt? Have friends working there?
Well, I also have friends working in Egypt. Now, as I understand it, despite what I said about Morsi just now, I understand the situation in Egypt has actually got more stable and is in some ways rather better. And, I wish Egypt well. It's a country close to Greece, with which Greece has had close contacts. And though I've never been to Egypt myself, it's an ancient country with a great civilization. So I would wish to see good things happen to Egypt. But it's got many, many, many problems. Many of its people are very poor. It lacks resources. It can't feed itself. And the industrialization that many people expected and hoped would happen hasn't yet happened. It needs strong and good governance and good reforms and a real effort to try to cope with the endemic problems of corruption and bad education systems that exist in Egypt. But, where there's a will, there's a way. But you do need strong organization, and I don't really see that in Egypt at the moment.
Okay, from Red Pirate Truth Seeker, Bolton and Pompeo is equal to Bornemann and Engel, etc.
Well, indeed.
It's a good comment, huh?
Very good comment.
For Russian Ballet, a $20 Canadian super chat. Thank you, Russian Ballet, for that. From Red Truth.
I'm a great lover of the Russian Ballet, I should tell you. And my grandfather was in Paris when Diaghilev's company came, and he saw all the great ballet stars of that time.
People don't know this about Alexander, but you actually know a lot about Russian cinema and Russian ballet, which is an FYI about Mr. Mercuris that people may not know. Retro Pirate Truth Seeker, do you think they might kill Corbyn or Sanders?
Well, who is they? I am sure that there are all sorts of people, dangerous people around, who might very well do it. And there was a disgraceful incident in Britain where British paratroopers, this is British Army soldiers, were actually on a firing range shooting at targets of Jeremy Corbyn. And they were serving soldiers. Now the military, when that was discovered, they say that they put a stop to it and that these soldiers were reprimanded. But when things like that happen, one has to be concerned. There's a notorious a famous TV program in Britain from the 1980s called A Very British Coup, which is about the election in Britain of a left-wing Labour government elected by a Corbyn-like figure. This is obviously made in the 80s. It's not Jeremy Corbyn himself, but it was a fictional figure. But it showed how the British establishment conspired against this person, and that did involve assassinations, not of the Prime Minister himself, but of people who were working for him.
All right, Super Chat Legion Trooper, how many more wars without the draft returning?
Well, that's a question the American people must answer. I don't know. But I would have thought that if you tried and occupied Iran, which we were talking about, you would need so many troops to do it that you would probably need the draft, which is one very, very good which is one very, very good reason why it's not going to happen.
Never going to happen in the U.S. Never going to happen in the U.S. From Red Pirate, Truth Seeker Super Chat, what tea, coffee, or other things do you drink?
Well,
we actually went over this in a video as well that we did today, Alexander, on the tea.
I will one day show you. I drink lots of teas. I'm a great tea aficionado, so I drink lots of Chinese teas, green teas, and oolong teas. There's a tea I have which is sold to me by Selfridges, which is an oolong tea, which is supposedly picked by monkeys. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's apparently very high up in the mountains, so monkeys have to pick it. I also drink lots of English-style teas from India, like Darjeeling teas, like this tea that I'm drinking at the moment is called Royal Blend, and it's a tea that was formulated by Fortnum and Masons for King Edward VII. So it's their most popular tea, as it happens. And I love Earl Grey. I mean, that's possibly my favorite tea.
All right. I learned to drink tea when I was in Russia, to be honest. That's when I really had an appreciation, learned an appreciation for tea.
Yes.
But I stick with coffee, but Russians drink a lot of tea.
Indeed. Coffee, I drink basically two kinds. I mean, if you're talking about filtered coffee, there's a coffee called Jamaican Blue Mountain, which is very popular, I know, in the United States also. It's very expensive, so I don't drink it very often. But I also drink Sumatra Blue Lintung, which is from Sumatra, which is a very rich, dark coffee. And, of course, in Greece, I drink Greek coffee, which I absolutely adore. And sometimes in England, I make it myself with coffee beans from Yemen, which are very expensive too.
All right. Super chat from Moon Dragon. Is U.S. being used by the Arab states for their own agenda, and the U.S. does not get it?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's exactly what the MBS is up
to.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, MBS is entirely doing all of that, and he's got his agenda. And I think people like Donald Trump, going back to that question about Donald Trump, does he have the understanding of the nuances involved in all of this? I don't think Donald Trump understands the extent to which he's being used by people like MBS and by people like Benjamin Netanyahu for their own objectives.
Okay, from Ziphius Super Chat, can Turkey uphold its own agenda apart from Russia's help?
Well, it depends what you consider that agenda to be. I think the kind of very complicated and very ambitious foreign policy that President Erdogan is following does need Russia's help, because without Russia's help, Erdogan would get into all kinds of problems, which the Russians are bailing him out of all the time. I mean, we see that in Idlib province at the moment, where Turkish troops have been shelled by some of these violent jihadi militants that Erdogan himself has been supporting, and he's had to call on the Russians to help him. And previously, when Erdogan was trying to capture a town held by ISIS in northern Syria, again, that ran into all kinds of problems, and he had to call on the Russian Air Force to help him and his troops achieve victory there. I think it was called Al-Bab, but I'm not absolutely sure now.
Okay, super chat from Robert Carr. Each Bitcoin is divisible by 10 billion Satoshis. If one Satoshi equals $1, then work out the market cap.
Oh, I wouldn't even try.
Yeah, I'm in.
If I mean, Alex knows more about Bitcoin
No, no,
than
big
I do.
believer in Bitcoin. A good person. The question was asked, who do we follow or who do we listen?
Yeah,
Max Kaiser is actually great for the Kaiser Report is
he
great for
is.
crypto and learning
Yeah,
about
yeah,
cryptocurrency.
absolutely. I have a friend, by the way, who's a Russian businessman, a former lawyer, but he's big into crypto also, and he tried to explain it all to me a little while ago. But I'm afraid there's the kind of technical questions that I don't really entirely understand. I would say this, going back to this question of fiat currencies that was asked earlier in our program. I mean, clearly there's been a move into crypto, and at the same time, the central banks are moving into gold. So I think you should see these two events
Right.
happening in parallel. I mean, clearly there's hesitations now about the dollar, and they are growing.
I agree with that assessment. From Red
Yeah.
Pirate, outside Europe, Brexit is equal to U.S. puppetry and control.
Well,
Is
I
do
think
they have as much control the U.S. now of Europe? I mean, and the U.K. as they once
Well,
had.
I did a long article for the Duran at about the time of the Brexit referendum, in which I said that one of the major problems for me with the EU is that it's become a geopolitical project dominated by the silent partner, which is the United States, and that key decisions in the EU are now made by the German Chancellor in consultation with the US President. Now, Obama, of course, was the US President at that time. That has fractured because Merkel and Trump don't get on. But I think to a certain extent what I said is true. And the United States is the dominant silent partner in the whole enterprise.
All right, from Sparky, Super Chat. Wore my new Duran sports shirt. Now all the women want me and all the men want to be like me. Must be like
Well, there you
Beatlemania when Alex leaves his house. Alexander,
well
when you
there we
leave your
are.
house in London, is it just like Paul McCartney and Lennon and Ringo Starr and Harrison when they were walking the streets?
It's not so
The
different.
Fab Four?
It's not so different. I wouldn't want to compare myself to them because I'm perhaps more grey in the hair than they were when they were at the peak of their Beatlemania. I would say, by the way, that McCartney and I share the same gym. So we have actually seen each other there. But I wasn't wearing one of those shirts at that time. And maybe if I did, I'd probably get more attention nowadays than he does because I noticed that he wasn't getting much attention at all.
Yeah. Red Pirate Truth Seeker. Shock horror. Thanks for soldiers shooting targets. I believe that was in reference to the comment that you made about Corbyn.
Yeah,
And it was
yeah,
that's pretty shocking news, to be
yeah. It
honest.
was. It
Very
was.
shocking.
I thought it was shocking news.
Yeah. Let's see. Super chat from Rainy Steps. Where does India stand in all of this mess?
That's a very, very good question because, of course, Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, has also played a very complicated game. He's been both trying to improve relations with the US because he's got this very difficult relationship with China, which he tends to see, I think, as a potential rival and an adversary. But at the same time, I think he doesn't want to be subordinated to the US. And I've been hearing stories that he's been going around Washington, or at least his people have been going around Washington and in European capitals and saying, please, 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 improve your relations with Russia, because all you're doing by being so hostile to Russia is you're forcing the Russians to get close to China, and that is limiting India's freedom of action. And of course, the Europeans and the Americans are paying no attention to him. But on the question of Iran, which is the one we've got to look at the moment, India has basically stopped importing oil, as I understand it, from Iran. But I think if there was an American attack on Iran, India would oppose it. I don't think their opposition would go beyond the verbal, but I think that Indian public opinion would be very, very opposed to such a war.
Okay, Burnt Offerings do a show on Ukrainian situation. We actually did a show on MH17. That'll be coming up soon. So stay tuned for that. Eagle ASE Super Chat 20.00 or 20 o'clock or 2000. I'm not sure what that Super Chat means, but thank you for that Super Chat, ASE. Red Pirate Truth, what if we go to war with Iran? We support Israel and Saudi Arabia? Question mark. Love you guys in every way. Who do we support in the war?
That's an excellent question. I mean, again, if you go onto the Duran, I did an article some years ago in which I compared Iran with Saudi Arabia. And I pointed out that, whatever criticisms you may have of the internal arrangements in Iran, I mean, Iran does have a civil society. It does have elections of a sort. It does have a competitive political environment. Saudi Arabia is a profoundly repressive autocracy. It's a dictatorship. It carries out the death penalty on a far bigger scale than Iran does. Iran is in many ways a society far closer to our own in the West than Saudi Arabia is. So why are we supporting the Saudis with this very repressive country that they are, and with this foreign policy, which everybody knows has supported violent jihad of the sort that we saw with, in 9/11? Why are we supporting them against Iran? And as for Israel, why are we supporting Israel's projects of extending Israeli influence in the Middle East and imposing settlements in the Palestinian territories and making peace impossible? Why are we doing all of these things? Again, is this really wise? I would emphatically say it is not. And that seems to me the point that the questioner is making.
Okay, from Reborn Through Hate Super Chat. How does Boris Johnson feel about mass migration into the UK? Today's news, UK is to accept thousands of migrants from Middle East and Africa per year. What are Boris Johnson's views?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to Boris Johnson, you need to understand that Boris Johnson's views on any subject will change from one day to the other, depending on what he thinks will advance his career. I'm sorry to be as blunt as that, but that's the reality. When he was mayor of London, he was very much on the liberal side of things where immigration was concerned. I mean, at that time, he paraded his position as a soft, a liberal Tory who was, in favor of liberal views on social issues and liberal on immigration issues. Now that he's pushing to become Conservative Party leader in an atmosphere where it's widely perceived that immigration was one of the major reasons why people voted for Brexit, he's taking a much stronger view on immigration. But like everything else with Boris, if you rely on him, if you trust him on anything, you are likely eventually to be disappointed.
All right, from Jan Schoenfield Super Chat. It was once said that there was a fifth column of Persians in the U.S. who would act in event of war. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't know. I would have thought that the U.S. intelligence community would be very alive to that possibility, and if there was such a fifth column, they'd have identified it by now, or they'd have found some of those people. I doubt it, actually.
It's a big Persian population, though, in the United States. That is true.
It is a big Persian population, but not all of them support Iran.
All right. With Iran incident, update on Idlib, Syria.
Well, more conflict there. I'm afraid my dog is getting very busy. Sorry.
Okay, answer this question if you want, and I'll get the next question as you answer your door. So give an update on Idlib, Syria, and I'll get the next one.
As I understand it, Idlib, the situation in Idlib is becoming increasingly violent. More and more fighting going on there all the time, with the jihadis being gradually pushed out of the southern areas of this territory. So we've not seen the resolution of this, and it'll take some time to come. But as I said, steadily, the Syrian army is encroaching on that territory, and it's recaptured some territory that the jihadis took over briefly in a counteroffensive.
Okay, super chat from Paul Carden. Looking forward to the Russiagate hoax ebooks, guys. Yes, we are preparing 2 ebooks. Paul actually has a great company that helps, that actually does transcribe the videos to print. Alexander writes the forwards. I work with Paul to choose the videos, and he just does the magic. So, Paul, feel free to put a link for your company in the super chat as well. This guy is solid. His company is awesome. So thank you, Paul, for all the hard work that you do. From Ziphius, will a future Eurasianist Turkey be allowed to boss around the East Med and Greece?
No, no. I think any attempt by Turkey to do that sort of thing is going to run into a host of enormous problems. So I would have thought that Erdogan's foreign policy is already wildly overambitious, and if he tries anything like that, he won't succeed.
Okay, let's.
Too many people will oppose it.
All right, from Red Pirate Truth Seeker, Alien Disclosure Program and the reality if true. Alexander, Tucker Carlson does a lot of shows on the alien stuff, which is kind of interesting to see Fox News handle stuff like that. But
yes,
is it true? I personally, I don't believe it, but
I don't believe it.
Maybe it is. I don't believe it.
Maybe I don't believe it.
All right, from Pete Guthrie, why is the now go-to excuse for medical issues dehydration? Look at Clinton, Nadler, Merkel. Really address the problem.
Well,
it's a good super chat, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, very good super chat. Very good point, actually. I mean, I don't believe it. I don't believe it with Merkel. I didn't really believe it with Clinton either. I think these people, exactly. I think these people are very, very exhausted, very stressed, and probably have health issues.
All right.
That's my view.
I agree. I agree with that. From Plebeian, the soldier were from the parachute regiment. They hate Corbyn for his advocacy of the IRA and his support of Bloody Sunday vets not being Annan.
I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's exactly right. I'm sure that's exactly what many of them think. But nonetheless, they shouldn't have done what they did. And the question that I got was whether someone like Corbyn might be assassinated. Well, when people practice shooting at him, then practice shooting at a target of him, well, one wonders, one does worry.
All right, from Track This MF, $2 super chat. Thank you for that super chat. And the last one, this is the last super chat, the last question, Alexander will wrap it up. Beauty of no deal Brexit is there is no fine print subject to interpretation. It'll be understood worldwide. No deal is the only true Brexit. We did a video on this as well. Alexander, your final comments.
That is exactly right. That is exactly why I support a no-deal Brexit. It seems to me that the issue all along has been either a no-deal Brexit or remaining in the European Union. To my mind, that was the choice at the time of the 2016 election. I think that most people in the 2016 election, when they voted for Brexit, meant that Brexit would mean a real Brexit, a complete disconnection from the European Union. That doesn't prevent Britain at some point agreeing trade deals with the European Union, perhaps even having a free trade deal with the European Union. But it's what people voted for was Brexit, and that has to mean a no-deal Brexit, and that is the way to bring this thing to an end. I've always said that. I've been saying this for months. I've been saying this in all our programs. That is, for me, the optimal outcome now.
Okay, we have one final super chat, and we will bring this live stream to an end. And it's from Penguins fan. Russia's supposed to buy warships and helicopters from France. Stupid idea it was Medvedev's. He should not be president.
Well, it was a terrible idea. It was a huge mistake. It was Medvedev's and the defense minister, Mr. Serdyukov. Apparently, the military were completely against it. Many of them said that these particular warships, the Mistral-type warships, weren't even suitable to Russian needs. And of course, what happened was that they weren't, in fact, in the end delivered, and they've been delivered to Egypt instead. Now, the good news is that the Russian shipbuilding industry are apparently in the process of building helicopter, amphibious warships for the Russian Navy. They're going to be very different from the Mistrals, and they will be much better adapted to Russian needs than the Mistrals. They'll be smaller, but they'll be able, for example, to operate in Arctic waters, which the Mistrals,
very important, yeah.
being French, never were.
All right. Red Pirate Truth Seeker, thank you for a great show as always. Thank you for the final super chat. Alexander, let's wrap it up. We said we're going to do a video on Iran and what's going on. We'll do about 30 minutes. We ended up going for about an hour and 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your questions to everyone that tuned into this live stream. We had well over 2,000. I believe we hit around 2,400 viewers at one point.
Yes.
Remember to like the video. Remember to share the channel with everybody that you know. Subscribe if you are not subscribed. Go to Duran shop, pick up a polo like mine, or pick up a long sleeve like Alexander's. And Alexander also has the Duran mug on his desk that he showed you, that he drinks his tea out of. And what else do we have, Alexander? The Brexit book. The link is in the description box down below. Any other final last words, Alexander?
We also have books on Russiagate coming, which we're going to be talking about, and of course, we will be keeping you fully informed on what is going on in this very difficult situation in the Gulf. And in this conflict between the United States and Iran. And if you want us to go on doing that, well, help us in every way you can by asking questions, giving us super chats, and buying from our shop.
Yep. And I think we're going to try to do a live stream tomorrow, I believe, tomorrow afternoon, I believe 3 o'clock London time in the afternoon.
Exactly.
We'll try to put together a super chat with me, Alexander, and Peter. So keep an eye out for that, a super chat, a live stream. Keep an eye out for that as well. All right, Alexander, have a good night. To everybody that's watching this stream and that tuned in, thank you for everything that you do. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Take care, everybody.